This day is called the Feast of Crispin. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when the day is named, and rouse him at the name of Crispin. He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors, and say, Tomorrow is Saint Crispin. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars, and say, These wounds I had on Crispin's day. That was from the famous Saint Crispin's Day speech from the play Henry V by William Shakespeare. Welcome to Hot Takes on the Classics, a gossipy gallop through the best books ever written. My name is Emily Maeda, and I'm joined by Tim McIntosh. You've joined us during our season on war. Hey, Tim.
Hey, Emily. This is one of your favorites, isn't it? You've been looking forward to this all season.
I was going to say that we almost arm wrestled over this, which, of course, I would have lost.
But it would have been fitting for a season on war that we would have arm wrestled for it.
Because I love this play so much.
It's so wonderful. Emily, I want to start you with a question. I know you know the answer, but it's just such a great little scene. So early in the play, Henry V by William Shakespeare, the Dauphin of France, he's a prince in France, sends King Henry IV a present to insult King. The insult is an allusion to Henry's youth and reputation as a pleasure seeker. What is the gift sent from the Dauphin to Henry V?
It is tennis balls.
Tennis balls.
And Henry V gives a great response. He says, when these balls will be played, I'll set my racket to it in the courts of France, and more will cry than ever laughed at it.
Yes.
So good. So good.
This little insult launches the play and a huge conflict. But listen, before we get there, Emily, I think I need to confess to the audience just how nerdy I am about Shakespeare. I feel like you're nerdy also about Shakespeare, but I'm taking Shakespeare nerd. I've taken it to a completely different level.
I think that's fair.
There is a whole podcast, of which I was the host and commentator, dedicated to doing every play on Shakespeare called The Play's the Thing. We did every single one of Shakespeare's plays. Most of them we did act by act.
It was a feat. It was a huge feat.
It was quite a feat. And you frequently appeared on that podcast.
Well, I don't know if it was frequently, but I enjoyed every time I came. It was so much fun. And you should all go and listen to it if you haven't listened to it.
The Play's the Thing. And this is just proof that if you're kind of thinking, boy, this Tim sure is nerdy about Shakespeare, you
can go find out.
Correct. You can find just out how correct you are. So the discussion today is about the play William Shakespeare, but I want to establish first, Emily, Henry V was a real king. This is a sort of fictionalized account by Shakespeare of major events in this conflict between Henry V and France. So let's talk about Henry V, the real guy, first. He was King of England for only 9 years, 1413 to 1422. An incredible military leader.
He was.
Incredible. Sometimes called England's great warrior king. And most of his successes occurred during the 100 Years' War, this long, drawn-out fight between France and England. And after Henry, because of his successes against France, England becomes one of the great military powers in in Europe, which it remains through the 20th century up until today.
I should.
Yeah.
Can we plug another podcast, or is that not allowed on this podcast?
No, that's totally allowed.
I was just thinking of one of our other favorite podcasts, The Rest is History. They recently did an episode on Henry V, which you should go check out. But I thought it was really fascinating because one of the hosts, Tom Holland, had sort of poo-pooed Henry V. But then when he prepared for, and I was really mad about it. But then when he prepared for this podcast, he sort of retracted his own words and said exactly what you just said. Henry was a brilliant military strategist. He really was. So if you want to find out more,
go listen to that show.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting that he himself sort of walked back to his poo-pooing of Henry V. I said, yeah, that's right. Walk it back.
Walk it back, bro. Walk it back. Okay, let's talk about the plot of the play by William Shakespeare. That's what we're going to be covering today, the play by William Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. So we begin with this insult. Tennis balls arrive to Henry V, and he is angry. He is insulted, and he tells the French ambassadors that he, you already said this, Emily, will turn the tennis balls into cannonballs and use them to play a set that will strike at the crown of France.
Yes.
Now, this kind of, if you don't know the background about what's going on in England at the time, you're like, wow, this is really kind of bold and courageous. But when you know what's happening in England, you're even more impressed by Henry IV. Because there's a problem.
Henry IV or Henry V? Wait a second.
If I said Henry IV, that was a mistake. Henry V.
Okay.
The problem is that the political situation in England is tense for a couple of reasons. Henry V's father has died.
Yes.
After he died, England, for reasons that we could explain but might get a little tedious, has gone through civil wars. The people are restless. But the big problem is actually Henry himself, because the whole insult that he was youthful and a pleasure seeker was actually quite accurate. And so,
yes,
Shakespeare, this is the third in a trilogy. And so let me just do a really quick comparison between the trilogy of the first Star Wars movies, the earliest Star Wars movies. The story arc is a little bit similar. So in the first Star Wars trilogy, if Luke Skywalker, instead of being a moisture farmer on Tatooine, was like a party boy in the British saloon scene, that would be Henry IV Part 1. That's what Henry V is, like a prince. His father is on the throne. His father's like, oh my gosh, will you just grow up, Hal? That's his nickname, Hal. But Hal's like, no, I don't want to grow up. I kind of want to hang with my guys. Sorry, Emily, go ahead.
Well, we get the introduction of one of Shakespeare's most famous characters, who is Sir John Falstaff, who is leading Hal astray, right?
He is.
He kind of, Sir John Falstaff takes on a life of his own in other plays, but we get him there, and Hal is his friend. He and his disreputable buddies.
The story about the popularity of Sir John Falstaff, the character written by Shakespeare, is, Emily, he was so popular that he gets kind of ushered off the stage in the second part of the trilogy. That would be Henry IV Part 2. He kind of gets moved off the stage, a really harsh scene between the future King Henry and Falstaff. But the Queen of England, the real Queen of England, Elizabeth, was so sad to see him go that the rumor is that she approached Shakespeare and said, hey,
bring him back.
Bring him back. And so, Emily, he did. Do you know what play he brought him back for?
Merry Wives of Windsor. Yes.
A very funny play about Sir John Falstaff in love.
So that's
back to our play.
That's good. But, and you say that. Never mind. Keep going. We'll talk about this in a second. I won't take your thunder.
Okay. So in the two previous plays, before we get to the play Henry V, Prince Hal, Henry V, is just like, he's a party fiend. Yes. He's a rich kid. He's not fit for the throne.
Right.
But we see him grow up. And the question of this play, one of the major questions is, will Prince Hal, now Henry V, prove himself to have grown up enough to be a great king?
Yes. And this is super important because Henry IV takes the throne from Richard II, right? So Henry IV is rubbing his hands like, is my kid going to be able to keep what I've established, right? I mean, so that's part of the question of the Henriad.
Because what Henry IV established was, if you kind of squint at it, not the most legal thing you've ever seen.
Exactly.
So there's going to be unrest.
Yes.
And Henry IV, Dad, knows it.
Yes.
And now he's wondering, is Henry V going to be grow up?
Is he going to be up to it, right?
Is he going to be up to it? So here's the word for moms and dads. Maybe you've got a son who's refusing to grow up. This is the trilogy for you.
That's right. That's right.
This is the culmination of a story of this rich, spoiled kid being challenged by his circumstances. And Emily, he rises to the occasion.
He sure does. He sure does. You're
really proud of him by the end of this. That almost sounds condescending. Like you're, oh, what a sweet boy. You conquered France. Right?
I know. What are we saying? What are we saying? No, but the nobility that Henry V or that Shakespeare has Henry display in this play, right?
Yeah.
Your heart can't but thrill at it. There is that scene in Brideshead Revisited where Charles Ryder says, this man, his heart never thrilled at Saint Crispin's speech, right? Your heart is supposed to thrill at Saint Crispin's speech.
It absolutely should. Absolutely it should.
And that's what the nobility that he is given by Shakespeare. You can't help but love him, right?
You can't help but love him.
So,
listen, Emily, before we leave Falstaff too far behind, I just want to say a little bit about him because Falstaff appears in one of the really well-known movie renditions of Henry V.
Yes.
It's Kenneth Branagh's version.
Yes.
We love this movie version. We highly recommend it to you. And Kenneth Branagh, I think this is his first directorial
I think it is too.
Movie.
Yep.
He edits in flashbacks of Falstaff.
Which is brilliant. It's
brilliant.
So brilliant.
Falstaff doesn't appear in Henry V, but we see flashbacks and we see this youthful Henry V, carousing in the, at the bar. We recommend it to you and we recommend the movie. Well, I guess I'm saying the same thing twice. Yeah. The movie is a little bit bloody. So if your kids are willing to try the language and you're okay with them seeing a little bit of blood, it can be a family film. It won 5 Oscars. And it's just incredible. It's an extraordinary film.
I have to say that this film, when I saw it when I was 13, started my love affair with Shakespeare. And I have to say, when I saw it originally, I was 13, I could not really understand any of it. Except that, I mean, I'm just to say, the language is hard if you've not been used to Shakespeare, and I was not. But the drama and the
emotion,
character, the emotion is so well done that you understand far more than you kind of can cognitively maybe take in.
Yeah.
But Kenneth Branagh is such a compelling Henry, and the soundtrack is so compelling. You should watch it. And he's brilliant to bring in Falstaff because you kind of don't understand Henry's real turn away from his friends, because his friends, Falstaff doesn't show up because Falstaff dies, but his other 3 friends show up in the play, and you don't understand it if you don't see those earlier scenes from Henry IV.
Right.
So well done.
After the insult of the box of tennis balls, Henry gathers his troops for war. Now remember, this is late medieval. So medieval era roughly goes from the fall of Rome, 400s, until Reformation Renaissance, 1500s. So we're talking like 1,000 years. And this is at the end. This is the 1400s. So he gathers his troops for war, and even before he leaves the shore, Emily, he faces a big test, a conspiracy against him.
Oh, I know. It's such a great scene. I mean, great in the sense of how Shakespeare orders it, right? Not great that there's a conspiracy, but great in how he brings it about.
There are these 3 traitors who are working for the French, and Henry discovers their plot and then tells them off for almost betraying him for gold. Here's the line. This is what he says to those 3 conspirators. Thou cruel, ingrateful, savage, and inhuman creatures, that thou didst bear the key of all my counsels, and knewest the very bottom of my soul, that almost mightst have turned me into gold.
Which is said to his closest friend, right? That's said to Scroop.
Yes. Yes. Ah. And then he orders Scroop and the other two to be executed. And this, calling back to like the real Henry V, he was known as a very severe punisher of wickedness within his army. Yes. He did not brook dissent.
No, and he didn't brook cruelty to civilians or stealing. Right. I mean, he held because he did carry within himself a sense that he was a Christian and should comport himself as a Christian, right? So,
and he expected, in as much as possible, that his soldiers and their leaders ought likewise. To also.
Yes.
Right. Now, after the conspiracy is found out, the English now sail for France, and they start to just fight their way all across the country. So they win after beating the troops in Harfleur.
Yeah.
And that's where Henry gives this incredibly beautiful, impassioned speech to motivate his soldiers on to victory.
Forward to the breach. Forward to the breach.
Forward to the breach. That comes from like right in the middle of that battle.
Mm-hmm.
During the battles, Henry is proving himself not just as a great tactician, but as a virtuous leader. So, an example, there are these two soldiers, Nym and Bardolph. They're caught looting. They're hanged at Henry's command. Again, he is so strict about law and order among his troops. And I just have to say, Kenneth Branagh playing this moment where the men are being hanged and he's watching it. He knows what must be done. And here's what he says after the hanging of the thieves. And keep in mind, if you've not seen Henry V, the movie, imagine Kenneth Branagh saying these lines with like tears in his eyes. He hates what he has to do. But he does it anyway.
Do you want to read those lines? Because he hates it particularly because Nym and Bardolph are his friends from Falstaff.
Yes.
Right? And so Nym, Bardolph, and Pistol all will die within the course of their march for indecent acts.
These are his fraternity buddies.
These are his friends. So and that's why he's crying. I mean, he would be probably crying anyway, but he won't, because there's a line where Baldwin says, "Don't hang us, you won't hang us." And Henry says in himself, "I will." Do you remember this, right?
I do.
He will do it So anyway, keep going.
Here's what he says at the hanging of the thieves, his friends. "We would have all such offenders so cut off, and we give express charge that in our marches through the country there be nothing compelled from the villages, nothing taken but paid for, none of the French upbraided or abused in disdainful language. For when lenity," meaning gentleness, "for when lenity and cruelty play for a kingdom, the gentler gamester is the soonest winner." Those last lines, I just want to read those again.
Oh, it's so good.
For when lenity and cruelty play for a kingdom, the gentler gamester is the soonest winner. Meaning, when there's a contest between kindness and cruelty, the kinder rival wins sooner.
And there we have the best aspect of Christian knighthood, right?
Right. In our last episode, we were kind of like, man, it is really hard to mash like Christian ideals of turn the other cheek and warrior ideals of aggression together. But this is an instance where Henry V puts the best possible kind of like lived interpretation on it.
Because there's even rules to war, right? You're not allowed to just kill and murder as you will. And
especially when civilians are involved.
Exactly. But of course, this isn't an ideal held previous to this, right? Total war is accepted. So that it is an amazing statement.
The climax of the play and of the war comes with the famous Battle of Agincourt, at which the English are outnumbered by the French, Emily, 5-1.
Yes,
the night before the battle. Yeah.
No, keep going. We'll talk about it in a minute.
The night before the battle, Henry goes into camp disguised as a common soldier, and he mills about, listening to the soldiers in his camp, sitting with them at the campfire, learning who they are and what they think of this great battle that they're about to face. And they're scared. Of course, they're scared to death. And then later, by himself, he mourns the fact that like the responsibilities of being king are ever present, always on him, and they are heavy. In fact, the famous saying, "Heavy is the head that wears the crown," it actually appears in the second episode, the second of this trilogy, Henry IV, Part 2.
But he says in this one, the king is but a man. He's just a man, right? He sort of dwells more on the fact in this that, like, do you think I feel these things any less? I'm just a man. I'm still just a man, even though I wear this crown and I'm responsible for all of these people. So
this to me is one of the real most beautiful themes in Shakespeare. We hear his kings who during this time are still believed to be a kind of a different cut of human being. They have like divine blood in them in some ways. I'm exaggerating a little bit to make the point.
Not divine blood, but divine sanction, that when they're in the role of the king.
Divine sanction, good.
Right. They're operating in a different sphere. They're not just themselves.
And Shakespeare, especially in Richard II and here in Henry IV, has these kings ask themselves and ask their followers the question like, am I anything really more than just a man who wears the crown?
Yes. Over and over again, they're wrestling with that question, aren't they?
They are. In the morning, before the battle, Henry prays, and then he gives one of the greatest speeches in the English language. I mean,
so great.
Unreal.
I love it.
If you've been listening to this show, you've probably heard us say this on a few different occasions because we're highlighting some of the best books that have ever been written. We're highlighting the best books that have been written about war, and there is nothing like a terrifying war or a terrifying enemy to bring out of a great orator the very best that can be said. So Heracles' funeral oration earlier in the season is one of the absolute zeniths of spoken word. It's incredible. And this speech is along, like maybe with a couple of the speeches in Julius Caesar's, just on the Mount Rushmore of great speeches.
And can I say that this speech is crafted after what Henry actually said? There are eyewitness accounts to his speech.
I did not know that.
Yes, that was brought out in that Rest is History podcast. I think it was an archbishop or a priest who writes down, and it was very much along these lines. Like, look, we're outnumbered. This could be really bad, but we're going to do this together. And I'm going to be right there with you while we do it. I mean, the words are better than what I'm saying. But Shakespeare works with actual accounts to develop this speech. Kind of cool.
You know what, Emily? This is a perfect... Emily, let's listen to part of this famous speech, and we're going to play for you just a bit from Kenneth Branagh's 1989 film, Henry V. Here is part of the speech before the Saint Crispin's Day battle.
Gloucester be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhood's chief, whiles any speaks that fought with us upon Saint Crispin's Day!
Gentlemen in England now abeds shall think themselves cursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap. Whilst any speaks, they fought with us upon Saint Crispin's day. In the speech, he takes this, it's incredible. He takes this speech, and the men who are so terrified that they're outnumbered 5-1, and he turns it into a great rallying cry. Like the people who were afraid to join us, when we get back victorious, they're going to regret the fact that they weren't with us in battle.
And
they will hold their manhoods cheap.
But from this speech, we also get we few, we happy few, we band of brothers. Right? And that's so evocative for future generations. We few, we happy few. Yes. So he takes the thing that is going to be supposedly the death of them and turns it into the thing that should be most wanted, right? There's only a few of us. The few are to share in the glory. And incredibly, he's right. I mean, just historically, the Battle of Agincourt is crazy because this little English band defeats an enormous French army. Right? I mean, historically, it's really unbelievable.
It's a miracle.
It is a miracle. I mean, and the amount of French noblemen that die, right? Like the whole thing is a catastrophe for the French.
And it works out great for our young king, Henry V.
It sure does.
The English win the battle. The proud French who insulted him now must surrender at last. Peace negotiations are worked out. Henry even gets to marry Catherine, the daughter of French king.
Which is another great part of this.
It is. And it's a complicated part. You know what? Can we just riff on this for a second? Because this is one of these things about the medieval world that sounds terribly confusing. Like, let me get this straight. My greatest enemy, Henry V, just crushed my army. I've got a great idea. I'm going to marry my daughter to him.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make any sense. It sounds really bizarre. But let's just give a couple of reasons for it.
Yeah.
Marrying your daughter will strengthen the alliance. So the French being defeated are now going to form like a contractual arrangement with England to kind of like have peace between the two of them.
Right.
And if your daughter is marrying the king of the conquering army, you're going to be less likely to break that bond. I'm not going to attack England. War is chaos. My daughter might get injured in the battle. That sort of thinking, I think, is very realistic. The other reason, go ahead, Emily.
Well, there's another reason, too, that part of the war is started because Henry is French. And he says, my bloodline allows me to rule in France, right? So he's not. Right. So it's like he's fighting them, but he's also saying, but I'm French and have the right to rule. So that does also, from a perspective, change things a bit. But there's another reason, too.
Speaking of bloodlines, a lot of rulers this time believed in keeping the royal bloodlines pure. And you can hear it from time to time in Henry V. He refers to breeding. So there's this sense that royalty is kind of genetically or physiologically set apart.
And
set
he's
apart
French.
To rule.
And he's
French.
acknowledging his French heritage.
Hey, a side note. We all kind of recognize now that, like, the dangers of inbreeding.
Genetically, this is not a good idea.
This is not recommended. There was a study published a few years ago in the Annals of Human Biology. They studied medieval portraits, Emily.
Yeah.
And they studied specifically Spanish and Austrian territories, aristocrats who had been painted that suffered something called the Habsburg jaw.
You can totally see it in paintings by Goya. Have you seen the paintings?
Can you really?
Oh, yeah. It's like, they're not a good-looking people, the Habsburgs. They are not a good-looking people.
So they had like this facial dysmorphia that they think, biologically, they think they have proved it was a result of inbreeding.
Yeah. So we're on the early end of that here. We're not so far down the line.
Right. We're not so far down the line. And good news for those of you who want to watch the movie, Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson do not suffer from facial dysmorphia.
Exactly. They have not been married. No, and it was when they were married that they made this film.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's
sad.
Sweet. That's sweet.
Yeah. This brings us, Emily, to my hot take.
Woohoo! I'm excited about your hot take. What's your hot take?
Here's my hot take. And this is actually probably red hot, but I believe it. And you know me well enough that you're not going to be surprised by this, but I just want to restate.
Okay.
This is like skillet has been on the stove for 30 minutes and we forgot about it. This is going to burn your hand.
Okay. Ready?
William Shakespeare is the most exciting, spirited writer in the English language. It's hardly even disputed. Why do so many of our students find him to be insufferable?
Why?
Why? Because well-meaning teachers teach his work as if they were novels.
It's so true. I am in complete agreement. So here is my hot take, Emily.
Here is my hot take. Do not make your students or your kids read Shakespeare.
What? Don't read Shakespeare. What are you talking about?
I love it. You're setting me up so well. I love Shakespeare, but even I struggle to sit down and just like go through 60 to 90 pages of Elizabethan English. So instead, teachers, parents, I beg of you, do something different like this. Have your kids memorize short bits of Shakespeare and perform it in class or at the dinner table. Can you imagine asking your 10-year-old son or daughter to perform the Saint Crispin's Day speech before dinner? You will be thrilled, and so will they.
Yes, you will not be sad. I'm thinking about... Oh, sorry, keep going.
Well, I just want to emphasize, Shakespeare didn't write novels.
That's exactly right.
These are plays. Texts that are meant to be performed.
Yes.
So even if you can't get your kid to memorize Shakespeare, I know you can, but even if you're not, want to try this, watch a live performance of Shakespeare. Like go to the Colorado Shakespeare Festival.
Exactly.
Watch Henry V, the movie. Best of all, ask them to perform Shakespeare. And if you want to have a great resource, here's a shameless plug. I did a class for Classical U about how to perform Shakespeare in your class or at home. And we will link it in the show notes. It includes a free trial. I think you'll enjoy it. Even if you're like, I don't want to watch 5 hours on this, McIntosh, you're still going to like the free resource. And I think it might
You're going to love it. No, you're going to love it. It's going to be great. And you'll learn ways to help your students engage Shakespeare. And
absolutely.
My daughter's on it, so I have to plug it too.
Yes. Yeah. Mercedes is one of I worked with 5 students. 4 of them had never acted Shakespeare. One of them, candidly, I asked them, I said, hey, what do you think of the play Romeo and Juliet? Actually, 2 of them. And they said, what's that?
Yeah.
So that's how kind of we were coming in on a real low level. Right. Okay. Emily, this is one of your favorites. I'm going to give you the mic before I close up shop for our outro.
You're going to give me the mic? Why are you giving me the mic?
Anything you want to say?
About Henry V?
Closing thoughts about Henry V?
I'm just going to plug what you said in your hot take because I remember so clearly seeing the movie, feeling so moved, and then I went and bought Henry V and tried to read it as a 13-year-old. And I was like, but where's all the magic?
Yes.
The magic is in the speaking. That's where the magic is.
The magic comes through the stage and the actors.
Yeah, you got to hear it out loud. So I agree with your hot take.
Thank you.
Go and watch the movie.
Go watch the movie. We want to thank Clark Stefanik, our producer, and our platform, True North. True North is dedicated to the renewal of classical education in the United States and abroad. One of their podcasts, the Classical U podcast, is with the director of Classical U, our friend Jesse Hake. If you're new to the classical movement or a longtime teacher, I think you'll really like the Classical U podcast. with Jesse. Thanks to Tom Hagerman, who wrote and performed our music. Go listen to his band, Devachka. You will really like them. Emily, see you next time on Hot Takes on the Classics.
See you soon, Tim.